to, give you all the options and the tools to make decisions that will be right for you. The other thing I always try to do with this presentation is to keep it fairly short so that we have lots of time for questions at the end. So without further ado, I'm going to get started. And for those of you who are thinking more about career options, I'll just foreshadow that my colleague Michael, who is going to be presenting next, will be talking about job searching and career options. So any questions about that you can save for Michael. Okay, so I'm going to talk first about thinking about what outcome you're looking for in terms of what kind of education or training options you might pursue here in Canada. I'll then look at the different educational options that exist based on those outcomes. And then at the end, I'm going to talk about some practical considerations that are important when you're weighing your decision. So first step, so always, let's look to the future. Let's look at what's at the end of that tunnel. What are the goalposts? What are you looking to do if you're thinking about taking an educational program here in Canada? Now, many people who are internationally trained law graduates or lawyers are looking to become accredited to practice here in Canada. And there are good options now to help you with that particular outcome if that's what you're looking for. The second thing you might be thinking about is, do you want to work in a non-practicing capacity? So as Michael is going to talk about in his presentation, there are an increasing number of roles that are either specifically aimed at people with legal credentials or where legal credentials or experience may be really helpful to you in securing that position or performing the duties of the position. And so lots of options for people to work in law-related jobs or jobs where having legal credentials is helpful. And there are obviously education options that can help you in that connection. Some people, particularly people who are looking at coming fresh to Canada, are looking for some kind of entry-level job or something that can serve as a bit of a springboard into the Canadian employment market. And so there can be options that would help you with that as well. And for many people, it's appropriate to think about both a shorter term and a longer term goal. So thinking about some of the different circumstances people might have, you may need to start earning income in the short term, or perhaps you need to work on language proficiency or other things in order to achieve the longer term goal of accreditation. And so these are all things you can think about in combination as well, or as a sequence. So first, let's talk about accreditation to practice. And the Canadian process is a little bit different from most other jurisdictions. There's sort of a two-step process in accreditation to practice here in Canada. And I'm going to give the context that I'm going to be speaking about the process for people who want to practice in a common law jurisdiction here in Canada. So that's all the provinces and territories except Quebec. Quebec has its own process, and the process I'm describing today does not apply for Quebec. So, but if you wanted to be in Ontario, BC, Nunavut, any of the common law jurisdictions, this is your process. So the governing body for internationally trained lawyers in terms of accreditation is called the National Committee on Accreditation. It's a committee of the Federation of Law Societies of Canada, so it has set a national standard for what is required for people who want to get accredited to practice here in Canada. And that standard is parallel in terms of the requirements to those for a Canadian law degree. So it's designed to be a fair process that allows entry to anyone who is internationally trained. And so basically, no matter what your background is, if you have a law degree from outside Canada, no matter how much experience you have or what type of experience, you need to go through this process to become accredited to practice. There are a number of fairly typical profiles of assessments in terms of what is required to go through this process. And so the typical ones that we see really often are civil law graduates, so people coming from a non-common law jurisdiction. This is most of Europe, Latin America, Asia, lots of parts of the world use civil law or civil law type systems. So if you're coming from that type of jurisdiction, you will be assessed by the National Committee on Accreditation as needing to go back to school here and do a program where you would study common law. So that's a fairly straightforward route for those coming from a civil law system. If you have an in-person law degree or a minimum of 1 year of in-person study from a common law jurisdiction, then you would typically get an assessment from the NCA that requires you to demonstrate competency in a certain number of subjects. Typically, that would be somewhere between 5 and 8 subjects, but it varies quite a bit from person to person and jurisdiction to jurisdiction. And in that circumstance, you're often given an option of either taking accreditation exams with the NCA or taking courses or an educational program in Canada. So you've got more options than the civil law folks. And then we do see also a number of candidates who are coming from distance education programs, and they are a little bit more similar to the civil law situation in that they are typically assessed as needing to do an educational program. The extra requirement for people with distance education degrees is that they have to study in person for at least some portion of their accreditation process. Now, there are many different individual permutations and combinations of assessments, but those are the typical ones. And so if you know for sure that you want to get accredited to practice law, at some time within, say, the next 5 years, because that's the validity period for an NCA assessment, then probably what you should be thinking about doing is applying for that assessment, because that will tell you for sure what you need to do, and you can put a plan together to complete it. And 5 years is a fairly generous period of time to be able to attack those requirements, whether they are taking courses or taking an LLM program or a similar program, or taking challenge exams with the National Committee on Accreditation, or some combination of those things. In terms of program options, if you were looking at options that would get you down this road to accreditation, there are a number of LLMs available in Canada. We have the largest one at Osgoode PD, which is our professional LLM in Canadian common law. We also have other specializations where students can take some courses toward their NCA requirements. And we get a lot of students who look at doing single courses with us. So particularly people who are doing a combination of challenge exams and courses will come to us for single course enrollment. That being said, there are about 4 other programs in Canada that are specifically focused on accreditation. There's a program at UBC, U of Alberta, U of Calgary, and U of Toronto. All have specific programs for internationally trained lawyers. And a number of the JD programs across Canada and different provinces offer what's called a JD special student status, where you can take some courses in the Canadian JD program toward your NCA requirements. So there are quite a number of different programs across Canada. They all take a different number of students. They have different costs. Their application cycles are all different. And so if you're going to embark on this process and need or want to take a program, you'll want to start right away looking at the options and what makes the most sense for you. Other options, there are some exam writing services and supports out there to tutor you or train you to get ready to take NCA challenge exams if that's the way you're going. And the one that we have offered at Osgoode PD, we're currently in the process of revamping it. So it's not available right now, but hopefully sometime within the next year, we'll be refreshing it and launching it again. And there are a number of other providers out there who provide support and help in getting ready to write those NCEA challenge exams if you don't want to write them on your own. It is perfectly possible to self-study and take on that process on your own, particularly if you're coming from a jurisdiction with similar exam styles to Canada. Other options you might consider: language, writing, or other non-credit programs to get you ready for accreditation. So again, either getting admission to a program or writing those challenge exams, you do need a high language proficiency. You need to be confident with your legal writing skills. And so there are a number of different options out there. Again, here at Osgoode PD, we're fortunate to have at York University a really good English Language Institute. So there are programs at, it's called ULE, that will help people get ready to achieve the language proficiency that they need for whatever their program or accreditation options are. We offer a graduate diploma in Foundations of Canadian Law, which is another option that can get people ready for LLM study, or simply provide a boost in advance of writing the NCEA challenge exam. So lots and lots of different options available here. Next, I'm going to talk about education options for non-practicing careers. So I think really the question here is, are you continuing in a similar field or the same field that you've been in previously, or are you looking to do something new? Now, obviously, if you're continuing in your same field, you may feel like you don't need further education or training, and that may be the case for you. If you're looking at doing something new, perhaps you're looking for a change, or you're looking at the Canadian market and seeing that there are opportunities in areas that you don't have experience in, then you might be thinking about looking for some education or training. And so thinking about some of the students we've had in our programs in the past, just the other night, I was speaking with one of our students who finished our program last year. She did the one of our professional LLM programs. She was in the consulting world in a previous country and has transitioned into a contract management role here in Canada. So certainly having done a program here and become familiar with Canadian law has been quite helpful to her in that journey, but she's using a lot of the skills and knowledge from her past experience. So she didn't need a lot to be able to transition into that new role, just some more familiarity with Canadian law because she's now working in the Canadian setting. She's not working as a lawyer, but she, certainly is helpful to her in that role to have legal training and experience. Other students we've had, so for example, a lot of our students who are doing non-practicing roles are working in the banking industry, and there continues to seem to be quite a demand for people in the anti-money laundering and sanctions areas of the financial institutions. And so that's an area where we've had some students who've said, you know what, I haven't done this in the past, but it seems really interesting. And so let me take a program where I'm going to be able to learn about that and transition into one of those roles, which again are typically non-practicing roles. So you're not giving legal advice, but you're certainly doing work where there's a lot of regulation, and having legal knowledge is super helpful. So in terms of options that you might think about, LLM degree programs, there are many specialized ones. Just looking at us at Osgoode PD, we have about 15 different specializations in areas like tax law, financial law, and health law. Lots and lots of options if you want to get a really in-depth and broad understanding of a particular area of law. Again, I referenced single courses, so sometimes people will do those for accreditation purposes, but also this could be a way of getting some very specific knowledge in a particular area. So thinking about my two examples, If you're looking at contract management, you might say, well, I have some experience in that, but let me take a course in Canadian contract law so that I know the Canadian law. Or in anti-money laundering, let me take a course on anti-money laundering. There are lots of colleges and institutes out there that offer specific training. Often college programs are highly practical, so those can be quite helpful. We know that a lot of people we talk to have gone into paralegal roles. Many of them have taken college programs or immigration consulting or other roles where they've taken college training to be qualified for those roles. So those can be very good options for training for non-practicing jobs. And then finally, thinking about things like certificate programs or other what we would think of as open enrollment, non-credit programs, things that are simply offered. You can sign up and take the program. There's no admission process. Again, those tend to be either quite short and focused on specific topics, or they are also sometimes quite practical. So if you want to learn contract drafting, for example, we have a program at Osgoode PD on contract drafting. So that might be something, again, thinking about different work options that might be the right practical solution for you. Let's talk finally in terms of goal options about, I need a job. I need a job quickly. Maybe I'm thinking longer term about a higher level non-practicing job or being accredited to practice, but right now, maybe that's not an option for a variety of reasons. And so I need to just get into the workforce, generate some income, get a bit of experience. So areas that could be useful to think about here, shorter options. Certainly language proficiency can be one of the factors here why people are maybe not moving into law-related jobs just yet, because law-related jobs will require very high level of proficiency and strong writing skills in English and also legal English in some cases. And so you might be looking at language training options to upgrade your skills. Single courses, again, can be useful, or again, certificates or open enrollment programs where you're looking for some sort of quick knowledge in a particular area so that you can get some skills. This can also be a way of Canadianizing your knowledge in a particular area. So if you've worked in a field in another jurisdiction, you may have some great skills to be able to get you a job quickly, but you might feel like, I'd like to take a course here and that to see what the differences are in Canadian practice or Canadian rules and regulations. So those can be useful options. Finally, before we turn to Q&A, and I've done what I promised and kept the presentation relatively short. So get those questions ready if you haven't put them in the chat or Q&A yet. Practical considerations. So this is really important. Sometimes there are things that are non-negotiable in your life, or limitations or goals that you have, objectives that you have that are really important, and you don't have room to negotiate on them. And so those things should be controlling factors when you're looking at educational options. So of course, the big one is cost. Certainly looking at a long educational program like a Master's of Law degree, those are expensive often. Now, programs such as ours, which is a professional LLM, are not funded programs. Typically, students do need to have the money to do those programs. There may be financial aid available through government programs for people with permanent status in Canada, but ultimately, often there needs to be a significant amount of funds that come from the student's own sources or that they get loans for. Again, there are micro-lending institutions and other financial institutions you can look to for loans and assistance, but those longer, more involved programs are quite expensive. Other programs, like if we're looking at short certificate programs or open enrollment programs, are often quite affordable. And so thinking about how these things help you with your short and long-term goals, some of those shorter programs may be the right thing to start with. If you know that you're on the road to accreditation and you need to take an educational program, let's say you're coming from a civil law jurisdiction, then you'll want to start thinking early about the financial side of this and how that fits together. Length of the program, also an important consideration, and sort of coupled with that would be time commitment. Is it a part-time program versus full-time? Certificate and open enrollment programs are often quite short. College programs can also be brief. If you're looking at an LLM, it might be either a full-time program, usually those are 1 year, versus part-time, which would usually be 2 years. And then what kind of time commitment is that in terms of balancing that with other commitments in your life? Are you planning to continue to work? Or do you want to do a full-time program and get it finished quicker? Those can all be the right answer depending on your own circumstances. What credential do you earn? So again, sometimes for some people, it's important to get a master's level credential, or they might need that to pursue a particular job or to pursue accreditation. They may need to take an educational program that has a particular level of credential attached to it. So that is sometimes important. Other times, what's more important is the content and the learning outcomes and the benefit that they're getting from the program. So think about how that factors into your decision. And then finally, what else are you getting along with the program? So this is often associated to cost. So longer programs, educational programs within a university, there are often lots and lots of other services that are provided and extras that you get. So again, as an example, in our programs at Osgoode PD, we have career development, we have academic support, we have wellness support, there are networking events, there's all kinds of extracurricular things that students can do. So those are all added benefits and services that come with the cost and level of the program. Less expensive, shorter programs often don't have those add-ons, but you might be surprised if you're researching competing programs, you may find that some programs do offer some of these extra things. And so that might be important to you in terms of your decision-making process. Okay, that takes me to the end of kind of my framework for thinking about educational options. I'm going to leave up on the screen our website at Osgoode PD. We run Q&A and information sessions on a very regular basis, and we have colleagues in the recruitment team who are more than happy to answer questions. We certainly pride ourselves on being a source of information for people, and so you can contact us with any question about educational options. We're certainly not experts on competing programs, but we will let you know to the extent that we do about other options that are available. So you don't have to just ask us about our programs. We're happy to be a source of information. And in particular, for those of you who are thinking about accreditation, we have videos available on our website about the accreditation process. And again, the Q&A sessions and info sessions are a great place to come to ask questions about how the process works. And we're also happy to help you if you have your NCA assessment to try to work through some options as to how you might complete those requirements. So I am going to see what questions have come in to date. All right. So I can see that lots of people who've said hello in the chat, which is fantastic. Love to see all those names of people from different places
Um,
around the world.
yes, Megan, let me first thank you for such a
Sure.
comprehensive presentation
Hmm.
and laying out the various options
Hmm.
and also keeping it real, um,
Sure.
going over the practical considerations. So we have a lot of questions. We don't have
Hmm.
so much time.
Hmm.
So I'm just going to start off.
Sure.
Can you share the language requirement to pursue LLM in Osgood Law School?
Yes. So I won't talk about all the different tests here, but on the website, we have a chart with all the different tests that we accept. TOEFL, IELTS, CALE, Duolingo, at least until next summer. The university is currently considering whether they're going to extend Duolingo past summer of 24, but that still is an option. And we also consider results from programs at the York University English Language Institute. If you get the right result at the end of your program, then that meets the language test. It is 7.5 IELTS academic or equivalent, and you have to have at least a 7 in reading and writing. And basically all the scores in our chart are sort of the equivalent of those things. So it is a fairly high level. It's higher than the NCA requires. Their requirement is a 7. I think their requirement is too low, and I've been trying to convince them of that for a while, but that's their requirement. We do also have a graduate diploma where the entry requirement is a 7 IELTS. So if you're not quite at the LLM level and you want to do something in advance, you can do that.
Okay, great, thank you.
You're welcome.
A lot of questions have come in about the costs.
Mhm.
So where can you get more information on costs for the courses you offer?
Sure. We have all of our fees on our website. They are pretty easy to navigate to. You can get to them from the top menu on the Osgood PD website. One of the top menu items is about academic programs, and under there you'll see a link to tuition and fees. To give you kind of round numbers, for a domestic student, so that would mean somebody who has permanent status in Canada. It's around 22,000 for a professional LLM degree, and you pay that in equal installments. So 3 installments if you're a full-time student and 6 if you're part-time. And the international student fees are around 45,000 Canadian for a professional LLM. And then the diploma is a bit less than that. And then if you take single courses, you're just paying sort of a proportional amount based on the credit value of the course that you take.
Great, thank you. Next question. Can you share ways to get an articling position once you graduate from Osgood with a professional
I
LLM?
Yes, I'm going to leave the nitty gritty of that question for Michael's presentation because he's going to be talking about career development. I guess all I would say is one of the things to look at, when you're looking at an LLM program, we provide career development services to our students. I think probably most other programs do as well, but that would be a question you'd want to ask about what kind of support is provided to students. We start providing information about career development to our students after they're admitted. So before they even start the program, we start doing info sessions and letting people know about recruitment processes that might be coming up. And then we provide that support sort of through the program, including workshops, job postings, as well as one-on-one support.
Mhm. And let me just go with the one last comment and one last question. So we've worked with you in the past and you used to have scholarships. Is that something you still have? And when does one apply for the scholarship?
Sure. Yeah. So we have, I'm going to use York terminology because scholarships and awards and bursaries, those all have specific meanings at York. So what we provide currently are entrance awards. We have entrance awards for international students, so people who would be coming on a study permit to do the program. We offer a certain number of those for each of our intakes, and those are for full-time professional LLM programs. So we have two different levels of entrance award. There's one at the $30,000 level and one at the $10,000 level, and there are a few of those given in the fall and again in the winter. We're currently working on introducing some entrance awards for domestic students. Hopefully we'll have those for, I would say, winter 25, because our cycles, we work very far in advance. But that's what we have in terms of entrance awards. And then beyond that, we have bursaries. So once students are in the program, if they have financial need, they can apply for those
Thank you for that.
bursaries. Mhm.
Okay, great. One last question. Can you apply for the LLM outside of Ontario?
You absolutely can. So I'll answer that in sort of two parts. You can apply for the program from anywhere in the world. So the whole application process is online. We don't require very many official documents, so it's actually quite easy to apply from somewhere else. In terms of actually starting the program, so if you're given an offer of admission and you're given a start date, if you're doing a full-time program, you do have to be here because full-time students are expected to study in person and we offer in-person courses. If you're doing a part-time program though, all of our part-time LLMs are available either completely or almost completely by distance. So I know one option that a lot of people on the session today might be interested in is the part-time LLM in Canadian common law, which is the one that helps with accreditation. And that program has distance options. So now it's important for people to know that for us at Osgoode PD, distance is not completely asynchronous. So you do have to be online for class some of the time. So depending on what time zone you're in, that might be more challenging. Most of our distance students are within Canada. And so we've designed our class times for our distance students to work within the Canadian time zones. You are certainly welcome as a student to participate by distance from Europe, or we've had students participate from Nigeria and India. That might mean that you're attending online class live in the middle of the night. If you're a night owl, that's great, sure. By all means, go for it. But I do want to make that point because some other program options are much more do at your own pace, offline sort of distance options. Our model is very much that we want our students and our instructors interacting with each other at least some of the time in real time.
Great. And you know what? I'm going to, like, a lot of questions are coming in. So let's just ask you a couple more.
Sure.
So one of our viewers found that experience is a large impediment to their application. Could you share how one can gain more experience if they only have a LLB in their home country?
Sure,
So,
yeah. So this is something that probably distinguishes us at Osgoode PD from other master's programs that are available either elsewhere in Canada or in other countries. So because our LLM is a professional LLM, it's meant for people mostly who have already got professional experience that's related to the program and who intend to use the learning in a professional setting. So it's not really it certainly is academic in the sense that we cover academic and theoretical things in the program. People write research papers, but there's always discussion of the practical aspects of those specializations in class. And so what that means for us in terms of admissions is that we're looking to admit mostly people who have professional experience because we want them to be able to talk about those real life issues in class. So as a rule of thumb, people with a law degree, we're looking for about 2 years plus of ideally law practice, but could be law related work experience. That's not an absolute rule. So we do admit fresh graduates sometimes if they have really excellent academic credentials. Maybe they've had really good extracurricular experience or summer jobs. Sometimes they've had pre-law work experience in business or in something else that's law related or in policy or government. So it's a hard thing to say you have to have exactly this, because we do look at our candidates holistically. I think if you're somebody who's applying to the program who doesn't have any of those things, then you would want to be looking at working in something that has some connection to law or policy or legal risk or responsibility. So that could be working in a law firm, or it could be working in government or in a bank or corporation, but in some area where you have some connection to legal risk or responsibility for a couple of years to get that experience to look at the program. The other thing I'll just say is, for people who are looking for advice on being competitive for the program, definitely connect with our recruitment folks, come to one of the Q&As. We're also happy to look at people's resumes and give them a sense for whether they might be competitive or what program they might be a good fit for.
And is this something you do with an appointment, or how often do you have these sessions?
Yeah, the Q&As, people can sign up for on the website. We run those weekly. We have another team member joining us in recruitment later this month, so we're hoping to ramp up the number and type of different sessions that we offer. But certainly anyone's free to email recruitment and ask for some advising, and we'll set something up.
Yes, and the recruitment address is right here, recruitment-opd@osgood.yorku.ca.
Exactly.
So I keep telling you one last question and I keep asking the questions, but okay, one really last question.
Sure.
Does the NCA have an online program?
So the NCA is the regulator. They are the committee of the regulator that does the assessment of credentials. So they are the people you would apply to for your assessment. That application can be done online. Their website has been redesigned over the last couple of years, and it's quite a bit more user-friendly than it was in the past. So they have a portal you can go into and submit all of your documents. Again, you can pursue that process from anywhere in the world as long as you've got internet access, and you can go on there and do that process. And then once you have an assessment, if you are planning to write the challenge exams with the accrediting body, with the NCA, they are still running their exams online. So again, it's a pretty accessible process if you're not here in Canada.
Great. Megan, thank you so much for
You're
sharing
welcome.
your expertise. We're always happy to have you here.
Thanks.
So,
And we certainly hope to hear from many of the participants. If you have any questions, please do get in touch with us.
thank you so much for that. So next up, I'd like to introduce our next speaker, Michael Tam. So Michael, a little about Michael. Michael is a program lawyer, professional graduate, and international programs at Osgood Professional Development. He does program and curricular development and academic and career advising for graduate law students. So he's going to be an excellent resource for your questions, I can tell. And yes, so if you have questions, you can continue to type them in the Q&A or the chat box. And you can also email us at info@canadianimmigrant.ca. So Michael, we're thrilled to have you here. Please go ahead.
Thank you so much, Ramia. So as Ramia mentioned, I'm the program lawyer here. But one of the things that I didn't sort of include in that bio is that I'm also an internationally trained lawyer myself. And so I've gone through the NCA accreditation process and licensing here in Ontario. And as an academic and career advisor to our LLM students, as well as sort of internationally trained lawyers across other associations. I'm really happy to be here to speak to all of you. I assure you I've been monitoring all the questions that had come in through Megan's presentation, and so I'll do my best to incorporate some of the answers to some of your questions in my presentation as well. But let me just share my screen here. So my
Yes, we can
presentation.
see you. Yeah. And Michael, if you wouldn't mind, I'm not sure if there's enough time, but please do share your personal experience if that's something you'd like to. And if
Yeah.
there's no time, we fully understand. But please go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, if background about me is going to be helpful, then I'm happy to provide it. So, I studied my law degree in the UK, and I had always intended to become a solicitor in the UK. I loved Europe. I loved studying there, and I loved living there. But as I was getting sort of older, my parents were also getting older, and because they were getting older, I realized, you know what, there's only so much time I have left to spend with my parents. And so through some soul searching, I decided, you know what, I'm going to return to Canada, be closer to my family. But what that also meant was I had to rediscover what it meant to have a legal career here as opposed to the plan I had set forth. And so I think a lot of our participants can relate to that, coming to Canada for all sorts of different reasons, having all sorts of different reasons for wanting to be here, but also having to navigate starting their career. I went through the NCA accreditation process in 2012, got accredited by the NCA in 2013. At the same time, I was doing a research stream Masters of Law because programs like ours, like the Canadian Common Law, didn't exist or weren't as popular. And so there weren't as many options to get through accreditation as there are now, thankfully. And then I articled in civil litigation. I got called to the bar in 2015 in Ontario, intended to become a litigator, but this opportunity at Osgood Professional Development to help other people who had gone through exactly what I had just gone through came up, and I couldn't pass up that chance again, which is why I'm so excited to be talking at conferences like this, because I'm helping other people go through exactly what I've gone through and trying to sort of reach their career goals in at the same time.
Thank
Um,
you for sharing that. That was very inspiring, and I'm sure a lot of our viewers today can connect with that. Thank you. I'm going to let you go ahead. Okay.
all right. So what I wanted to first talk about is having a shift in mindset. One of the things that working with internationally trained lawyers on a regular basis, I realize is, there's all of this information and gossip out there about how, not having Canadian experience is going to be to my detriment, or not having a Canadian JD degree is going to be to my detriment. And I really want to challenge that. I want everyone on this call to first have a shift in mindset. I need you to remember that, the idea that you're not as competitive as a Canadian law student is false. The difference between you and a Canadian law student is just you're less familiar with the processes that are in place here, the recruitment processes, what law firms are looking for, what law schools are looking for, how law schools might evaluate you. And so it's not that you're not as competitive, it's just that you need to be attending things like this and finding resources to get you familiar with what the processes in Canada are. The other sort of false narrative I hear a lot is I need Canadian experience in order to be competitive. And while Canadian experience will certainly help you familiarize yourself with what is expected, what the needs are here, how to serve Canadian clients, how to deal with Canadian law firms, how to deal with Canadian opposing counsel, I need all of you to remember that if you've been a lawyer before, if you've practiced anywhere in the world, practice of law, being a lawyer, is very similar everywhere in the world. The laws themselves might be different, The case law will for sure be different. The legislation will be different, but the skills are the same. Dealing with clients, making sure they trust you, calming them down, convincing lawyers or judges or juries about what your position is, doing the legal research and creating a compelling argument and doing advocacy for yourself and for your clients. These are all the same skills, no matter where you are in the world. Facetiously, sometimes I say, being yelled at by a judge feels exactly the same everywhere in the world. Having a deadline that's midnight that you're sort of pressed up against, that feels the same no matter where you are in the world. Having clients call you and yell at you at all hours of the day, those feel very similar across the world. And so remember, it's not that you need Canadian experience in order to be competitive. It's, can you find a way to convince me that the experiences you've had in other jurisdictions are going to matter here, are going to apply here. And you're the one who needs to do the work to figure out, how can I make this relevant to any employer who's considering me or to any law program who's considering me? So the things that I do need you to understand is that you do need to advocate for yourself. As a lawyer here in Canada, you do need to have excellent written and oral advocacy skills, and nobody is going to advocate for you except for you. And so you need to be confident in your abilities and skills. What are you bringing to the table? Have that kind of sense of confidence every time you're talking to anybody who's in the legal profession, because you're the one who gets to create the entire impression of who you are and what you can do. And there is some truth to the fact that there are going to be some cultural differences and nuances from where you came from. In terms of talking to somebody who you might see as maybe an authority figure or superior to you, understanding that maybe you don't need as much deference or need to sort of step back as much as maybe you did in your home country, because everyone here might see you more as a peer, more as somebody who's in their professional network, rather than somebody who's just their junior or subordinate. The thing that you should remember in terms of cultural difference is that no matter who you're talking to, everyone's going to want to help you. Everybody who is in the legal profession knows how complicated it is, how difficult it is to get in. And so you'll find that more often than not, people will want to help, will want to give you advice, will want to meet with you, but you're the one who needs to know how this person you're talking to might be able to help you. Make sure that the request you have of the person or the questions you're asking of that person are things that they're competent in giving you advice on or answering. I find that the internationally trained lawyer approach whenever I'm meeting sort of internationally trained lawyers at networking events is to sort of stop me, tell me they're an internationally trained lawyer, tell me, their entire life story, and then say, oh, I need some help. And my first question is always, well, what would you like help in? What do you think I'm capable of helping you with, so that we can narrow down maybe the scope of the conversation? So you want to make sure you sort of prepare, be an advocate for yourself, but also know how different people might be able to help you in different ways. You cannot be passive in your own career. So for the rest of the presentation, I'm really going to be talking about sort of taking initiative and figuring out where you are in the process, figuring out how to package yourself in an application, how to talk to lawyers and professionals in the profession, so that you know that you are an active participant in your job search and in your career journey, rather than just hoping for the best and hoping that, it works out passively. And finally, in terms of cultural difference, you have to remember that there are going to be differences in terms of how you network, in terms of the application materials themselves. And so I'll cover some of that for sure. But I think if you take nothing else away from this, remember that there are lots of resources out there. Canadian Immigrant is, of course, one. Schools and career advisors at different schools can certainly be that for you as well. But there's also lots of other diversity associations, legal associations, who have sort of events and information sessions and workshops on exactly all of these issues, especially directed for internationally trained lawyers. So be confident. I think is the best thing I can say first and foremost. And even if you're not feeling overly confident, try to surround yourself with people who can make you feel better and make you feel more confident, because often the accreditation process, the licensing process, applying for jobs feels like a very isolated experience. But recognize that lots of people are going through exactly what you're going through. We have 110 other people who are on this call right now who are experiencing exactly what you're experiencing as well. And so recognize that you're not alone. So be confident that you're not the only one going through this. Related to my previous slide about being an advocate for yourself, remember, you're the one who has to convince me that you are capable, that you are hireable, that you are eligible for the programs that you're applying for. And so be mindful of that. I think one of the most important things that ITLs sort of have to get their mind around is that your education and experiences do not speak for themselves. I think a lot of you might be coming from jurisdictions where the schools you went to, the experiences you've had, the firms you were at, all dictate that you are at a certain caliber, and therefore people don't need to scrutinize the actual work you've done or the actual grades you have because you are at a certain level based on your education and experiences. Thing you have to recognize here is not everybody who's looking at you as a potential applicant has that context. They don't know what the rankings of the schools might be, the rankings of the different law firms in your country might be. And so the education and the experiences do not speak for themselves. You have to write them in a way that's compelling to the reader on your application. You have to present them in a compelling way in an interview or in your networking opportunities, because otherwise they won't know how amazing a candidate you might be. So no one's going to advocate for you but you. And you have to remember that you are a unique person in the Canadian legal profession, because nobody has the experiences you've had. Nobody's worked on the things that you've worked on, and nobody can figure out how it's relevant to Canadian legal practice except for you. So do sort of that soul searching, look through your education, look through your work experiences to find the most interesting, unique aspects of yourself that other employers would be excited and compelled by. So I'm going to talk about job hunting on this slide. I know quite a few of your questions pertain to taking different types of roles, trying to get articling placements, what will count as articling placements. And so I'm happy that this session is recorded. I want a lot of you with those questions to go back to the beginning of Megan's presentation, because where you are in the process is crucial in identifying what kind of jobs you might be eligible for, which kind of jobs you should be looking at. So if, for those of you sort of who are still a little unsure, if you haven't started the National Committee on Accreditation process to accredit your education and experience, highly recommend you do that, because once they've given you sort of a response, you'll know how much time it will take you in order to complete what they're asking you to do. And if you are in the accreditation process, or still just starting the accreditation process, or haven't yet finished the accreditation process, you are equivalent to somebody who is in a Canadian JD, because the NCA Certificate of Qualification signals to the legal community this person has the equivalent of a Canadian law degree. And so as you are completing your NCA requirements, realize that you are similar to somebody who's going through a Canadian JD program, and therefore you're eligible for a lot of the same similar roles that other law students in Canada would be eligible for applying to. It's only after you've completed your NCA accreditation and receive your certificate that you will be deemed equivalent to a Canadian JD student who's graduated from their program. And it's only after you've gotten your CQ that you can work as an articling student in a jurisdiction, or a student at law, or a law practice program placement student, depending on which jurisdiction you're in Canada. However, what kind of jobs you're ready for, you also need to understand what their recruitment timelines are. And so one of the things about the Canadian legal profession is a lot of the different licensing bodies regulate the timelines for recruitment. And so if you anticipate you will be eligible for licensing in a future licensing cycle, be mindful that some of the job applications for that licensing cycle might already be open, might already have passed. And so not only do you need to know where you are in the process, but you need to anticipate and plan, when am I eligible for the different types of jobs that are in sort of the regular legal recruitment cycle? And do those timelines work for me? Do they work for my accreditation timeline? Do they work for my licensing timeline? Going back to my point about advocating for yourself, it's really important you figure out what this timeline is, because if you apply for a job and you don't know if you're eligible for it, the employers might also not know if you're eligible for it. If you're not clear about where you are in licensing or accreditation, or that you are eligible to start, an articling position, the date that that articling job starts, then you might be shooting yourself in the foot. If perchance that employer genuinely wants to take you on, and then you realize after the fact you actually can't start for the date that they're proposing because you haven't finished your accreditation with the NCA. And so it's really, again, important for you to plan out, how long is it going to take me to finish my NCAs? And then subsequently, when will I get my certificate so that I can start the licensing process in any jurisdiction? And then backtrack from that. If I'm applying for jobs during that licensing cycle, when did those job applications start? And can I be sure that by the time that job starts, I can start for that job? So again, for those of you who, might have missed it, rewatch the beginning of Megan's presentation where she talks about accreditation timelines, the different types of accreditation profiles that the NCA gives, which will give you a sense for how long it might take you in order to get accredited. So let me talk about the types of jobs that are available to sort of Canadian JD students as well as NCA candidates. So you'll see jobs about, the 1L or the 2L summer student roles. And in the Canadian JD context, these are roles that students will be taking between either their first and second year or their second and third year. What that means in terms for you is, these are jobs that typically firms take students for, and they might choose articling students from these summer student pools. So you might be hired on as a second year summer student for one summer, and then they might consider you for articling for the subsequent summer, which means you have to decide for yourself. Do I want to apply for 2L summer jobs if the intention is that I'm going to be about a year away from licensing after that summer job is over? And so that's a choice that you're going to have to make for yourself. If a firm really wants to be training their students over multiple years, or you identify that that firm doesn't regularly hire articling students because they have a pool of summer students that they regularly hire from, then maybe it's a good idea to think about, if you should invest your time in that kind of timeline and plan to do a summer 2L position and then have an articling for the subsequent summer with that firm. On-campus interviews are things that you'll see as well. Traditionally, with a Canadian JD student, on-campus interviews are where a firm might see multiple people at the same Canadian law school that they want to interview, and so they'll actually go onto campus to interview those students, which is what on-campus interviews are. Those opportunities for interviews traditionally were exclusionary to internationally trained lawyers, but thankfully over the last 4 to 5 years, I've been part of a team that's helped bring these on-campus interviews to internationally trained lawyers. And so there is an organization out there called ITL NCA Networks that are organizing these on-campus interviews for all NCA candidates across all of Canada who might be interested in getting an opportunity to do these first instance interviews with some of these bigger national firms and government organizations. And so if you're interested in those summer roles and want to participate in these on-campus interviews, highly recommend taking a look at that association and the process for OCI interviews for internationally trained lawyers. Articling is something that across all of the different jurisdictions you'll have to do, but the timing for that, the length of that will vary from province to province. But it's basically the experiential training you get as a part of licensing, because as a student who is licensing, you're not fully a lawyer yet. You're not called to the bar of any province. And so all of the work you do, all of the research and advice that you give has to be supervised by a principal who is a qualified lawyer in that jurisdiction who can oversee all of the work that you do. And so in Ontario, articling is anywhere from 8 to 10 months, and it is a part of the legal licensing process with the Law Society of Ontario. And in Ontario, there's also the Law Practice Program, which has placements as a part of that program, which will also satisfy this experiential component for you. So I was seeing a lot in the chat during Megan's presentation about all of these other roles, about being a paralegal, about being a legal assistant, law clerk, about interning, about maybe consulting. So I'm going to address some of these as well. Being a paralegal in Canada, but especially in Ontario, it's a licensed profession as well. These are entire careers in themselves. And so some people just become paralegals, and that is the career that they're looking for. And so while the NCA might give recognition to people who've completed a paralegal program, I think it's really important for you to decide what is worth your time and energy. And for those of you who want to become a lawyer, want to give legal advice, want to be in the role of being the lawyer on a file, on cases that only lawyers can handle, then it's really important maybe not to get sidetracked by other designations that you think are going to help you there, because again, those designations are careers in themselves, and there's a career trajectory for those as well. The paralegals are all also licensed by the Law Society of Ontario. There are rights of appearance that you can have as a paralegal, types of files that you're able to work on as a paralegal. And so I think it's up to you to decide, is this a career path I want to go down for at least a few years so that I get sort of that training? But if ultimately your goal is to become a licensed lawyer, an accredited lawyer, I think I would err on the side of maybe making sure that you're spending your time directed at building your professional network or applying for just the jobs that you're really looking for, instead of trying to get sort of other types of designations and trainings to get you on the path of being a lawyer. Same for being a law clerk. This is a regulated profession. People need to sort of go to college and get sort of a law clerk diploma in order to fulfill those roles. Legal assistants are not as regulated. Lots of different types of roles can be a legal assistant. But as a career advisor, I often sort of talk to students who are applying for these types of roles, and I ask them, if your only goal in becoming a legal assistant is to get experience in the hopes of becoming an articling student later on, think about what the employer is hearing from that. The employer is hearing, you don't actually want the job I've posted, and I might need to rehire for this job in a few months when you feel like you're ready to move on to articling. And so again, just be mindful of what the employer might think as you're applying for some of these roles. I think it's certainly useful to get some experience if you want sort of to earn some extra income to get that Canadian legal experience if you think that's going to be helpful, but make sure you're able to convince that employer you're willing to stick it out for at least the time that they need you so that they're not stuck looking for a legal assistant again later on. Again, this comes from a mindset of the applicant thinking, I want to learn and grow and get experience. But remember, the employer is then thinking, what is my return on investment for giving you that experience and growth? Hopefully you still stay on with me so that I'm not looking for somebody else, in 4 months and 6 months. So be mindful that those are sort of opportunities in themselves, their careers in themselves, and employers, need legal assistance to help their lawyers. And so can you convince an employer that this is truly what you want as a part of your career path? Being an intern, that's not a very regulated term here in the legal profession. There are not that many opportunities to just kind of be an intern at different firms. People either want you at like full time to work for them, or people are okay sort of having you shadow them. But being an intern doing some work, again, that's not typically a role that is common in a lot of law firms because there are such structured recruitment processes in place for the different levels of jobs that they have. And in terms of consulting, again, this is, anybody could potentially be a consultant. I know lots of students also consider doing sort of the immigration consultant work. And to my point about, being a paralegal or law clerk, what is your end goal? And if your ultimate end goal is just to become a lawyer, I would much rather encourage you to focus your attentions on that. So I know we're running low on time, so I want to make sure I get to sort of the application components of this, but I wanted to address some of these questions because I saw so many of them come up during the last presentation. So where to look for jobs? I think be as expansive as you can. I think there's lots of opportunities to look for jobs on different websites of different law firms, different career portals, all the different professional networking websites as well. But ultimately, anything that's posted online, lots of other people are going to see. Hundreds of people might also apply for it. And so there's limited utility in passively searching online for roles. Make sure you do your research on the different firms, how they hire, how they recruit. Different companies will also have different hiring practices and different policies on how they might be posting for jobs. Networking is key. I know lots of internationally trained lawyers hate when I say this, but networking is crucial in your job search because ultimately it is the one way to narrow down who I might consider in a stack of, 200, 300, 500 applications. The more I've networked with that firm, the more people might remember me and they might shortlist me for an interview. So networking is crucial in making those connections and learning about the firm and making your application stand out and in hopefully getting shortlisted for roles. So in terms of applications, I'm going to cover this really quickly. There's lots of resources out there on resume and cover letter. I've certainly done videos in the past on resume and cover letter, both for Osgood Professional Development as well as for other associations serving internationally trained lawyers. But do your research, know the firm. It takes time to prepare these application materials. So don't underestimate how long it's going to take each application, because ultimately you should not be sending the same application, the same template application to every single person, because legal employers can very clearly and quickly tell if you're sending in a template application that isn't tailored to my firm, my organization, and if you've not spent the time thinking about why you're a good fit for me. Save the postings for jobs if you find them online, so you can refer back to it, mirror some of the skills that are on it in your app, in your resume, in your cover letter. But also, in the off chance that they take the posting down in advance, you have it to refer to, especially if they ask you in for an interview. You can refer to the job posting really quickly. In terms of format, for font and length, let me get to that right now. So application materials in terms of your resume, it should be a 2-page resume. I know the image on this slide is very small, but I'm not having you look at it for knowing what to write on it. I'm having you see what the structure of a legal resume is. Typically, there isn't sort of a skills or an objective section up top, because lawyers typically want you to just prove that you have those skills in bullet points in your work experience or in your education. Education typically comes first, so there should be a block for education. For internationally trained lawyers, I also suggest this be an education and qualification section. So you can write down if you're called to the bar in other jurisdiction. You can write down when you're expecting to complete your accreditation requirements, or you can expect to write, when you're going to be a licensing candidate for a jurisdiction. Again, making it clear to the employer that you are capable of starting the job for when that job starts. You'll see you get right into the work experience right after your education section, short bullet points, concise, to the point, but really focus on the skills that you've developed that are relevant for the job that you're applying to. So what are some of the skills you'll need as an articling student or as a lawyer here, and how have you honed those skills in past experiences that you've had in both your legal and non-legal jobs? Also, bullet points should be memorable, right? In a stack of 300 applications, I need to remember your application. So give me a sense of the responsibilities that you've had, the complexity of files you're on, the quantity, the limits, numbers, figures, the types of clients you've worked with. Make sure you give me as much sense of what you're capable of doing and the quality of work and the caliber of work you're capable of doing, so that I can be impressed by it as I'm reading, and I can think, oh, that person worked on that really impressive thing. Let's ask them in for an interview. You want every bullet point to be that memorable. And then you'll see on the second page, it'll go sort of continuing work experiences, but also, if you have extracurriculars or awards or publications, you could put it there. Ultimately, make it relevant to the job. Make sure all the things that you put on are designed in some way to convince me to hire you. So specificity with language is a huge thing. Make sure that you are clear what the skill you want me to focus on is, or what you actually did on a file. I see a lot of times, especially those of you who've worked as junior lawyers before, you say things like, oh, I assisted on this, I assisted on that, oh, I facilitated this. But that doesn't clearly identify what your contributions to a file might have been. Assisted can mean anything from you did all the photocopying on a file to you drafted everything beginning to end and the senior lawyer signed off on it. And so because it's not specific enough as to what your contribution is, it doesn't spark anything in my head when I'm reading it to remember what you can do or what you're capable of doing. So really break down, what were my contributions to a file? I know a lot of internationally trained lawyers are scared of being too or overselling what they're capable of doing because they might have been on a junior end. And I always respond, even if you only had a small component of a file where 20 other lawyers were working on it, you still made a contribution. Maybe your research affected the litigation strategy in some way, or maybe the drafting you did was excellent and could be sent right to the client. There's still opportunities there to sort of focus in on what you can do. And to my point about templates, no one resume is going to work for every job. And so it's really important for you to think, do I need to have a firm, an application, a resume that speaks to a full service firm where I emphasize all different types of skills across different practice areas? Or maybe I have a litigation focused resume that focuses on advocacy skills and litigation skills. Or maybe I have a public service resume that focuses on, serving the community and maybe policies and regulations and compliance that you might be doing. So don't think that one resume is going to be sufficient, unfortunately. This is a slide on the different types of skills you might need, right? So again, think about the types of skills you might have developed or need as a lawyer, which is more than just saying, you worked on this file, you represented this client, you appeared in court. Think about, the writing skills you have, the diplomacy skills, de-escalation skills that you might have, being client oriented, or, researching or client interviewing. So, again, the more you take a look at different job applications, the more you take a look at, the skills lawyers need to have, the more you're going to be able to figure out, okay, what are skills I think I'm going to need at this job? Start building up sort of that list so you can make sure that those are skills that you're emphasizing on your own application. Cover letter needs to look like a letter. So you see it here on the left-hand side. Again, it's meant to be small, so you can't just read what it says. But again, this is sort of what a template cover letter would look like. There's sort of a header that matches your resume. There's an address. There's sort of a salutation, a reference to what job you're applying to. And then it's just a letter that's compiled with, a couple of paragraphs and then sort of your signature at the end. So that's what it looks like in terms of formatting, but how you're going to be building your cover letter, it's crucial that you've done research on the firm. It's crucial that you've networked with the firm, because those are the ways that you'll be able to link every paragraph and link everything you say to the job itself or to the firm itself. You'll already have focused on skills on your resume and the different experiences you've had. And so this cover letter is not just a recitation of the skills and experiences you've done. The cover letter now needs to be a narrative. It needs to create a story about who you are, what you're passionate about, why you're interested in this firm, why you're in Canada now, and why this job and this opportunity is part of the career journey you're going to have in Canada, hopefully with this firm that you're applying to. And so you see, it's an argument that you're making. Your argument is like writing a research paper, and the thesis of this research paper in this cover letter is hire me. And so make sure every paragraph proves why you should be hired. And every paragraph is tailored to the specific firm or organization that you're applying to. Make sure you're avoiding vague language, make sure your sort of grammar and syntax are fine, and make sure you avoid unqualified statements. So what I mean by that is, don't just say something without proving it, right? Oh, I have a passion for corporate law. Okay, prove it. Oh, well, I've studied corporate law in my master's. I've worked in corporate law for 5 years back home, and I've been passionate about helping companies thrive, which is why I'm so passionate about your corporate law department, right? So always prove what you're trying to say. A typical cover letter I see is sort of, I'm an NCA candidate. I'm looking to learn and grow. There's a paragraph about your experience. There's a paragraph about your skills. Please consider me. And employers see this over and over and over again, which means that this kind of typical cover letter, it's fine, but it doesn't stand out. And so instead, I want you to maybe rethink the structure of this. Again, think about it like a research paper where you're trying to convince me to hire you. Maybe instead of just a bland introduction about, I'm an NC candidate, I went to the school, I'm interested in hiring you. Maybe you introduce your story about how you're passionate about something and how that passion has weaved its way through your education and your experiences, and why it's now made you so interested in this firm now. Even in your paragraphs about your experiences and skills, make sure it's curated. Make sure the topic sentence of that is not just, I've developed a bunch of legal skills, but, I know that, articling students here need to have excellent XYZ skills, having talked to your articling student this year. And then give me examples to prove that you've honed and developed those skills in your own experiences. And every paragraph should refer back to the job or firm in some way, because then it won't feel like it's just a template cover letter where you lift out a couple of sentences or a paragraph, replace it with the tailored paragraph, and hope that it works out to read like a tailored cover letter, because ultimately it's not going to read like a tailored cover letter if I can just lift out certain sentences and paragraphs. In terms of job interviews, hopefully after your applications are successful, I want you, in terms of preparing for job interviews, to have something to say about every single thing on your application, every bullet point, every sentence. Make sure you have a minute or two to say about it in case the question is, tell me about that. In Canadian interviews, there are a lot of behavioral-based interview questions, and these tend to either be in the form of a hypothetical situation where I pose that you are the student at my firm, and there's this scenario that has come up. How would you deal with that? The other way a behavioral question might be asked is as a give me an example. So it might be give me an example where you've had to deal with these issues. Why employers ask behavioral-based questions is because they want to get a sense of your problem-solving abilities, right? They'll be typically around issues that you will face in a law firm or in legal practice. You know, a conflict with somebody, time management issues, maybe you've identified a mistake, times where you've had to follow instructions, times where you've had to be a leader. And so think back to your experiences so that you can draw on them, whether it is a hypothetical scenario or if it's a question that, tell me a time when you've experienced this. There is a way to answer behavioral-based questions. It's called the STAR approach. There's a lot of literature out there on how to answer a behavioral-based question with STAR approach. So I would highly recommend reviewing those. And my biggest pointer for that is the action, the A part of STAR. The A part of that acronym is the most important part of that. So make sure you give as many ways to address that problem, have many ways to action on that issue as possible, so that it shows that you have an idea of all the different ways you can problem solve that issue that's at hand. Private sector versus public sector interviews do tend to be different. Public sector interviews tend to be much more substantive in nature about what you know about the law that they work in, the regulations, the compliance, the Supreme Court cases that they're on, and they're all structured so that everybody gets asked the same question. Those questions are scored, and the top scorers move on to the next stage of recruitment. Whereas private sector interviews tend to be more about getting to know you, getting to know your experience, understanding who you are and whether or not you're a good fit for the firm. And my last piece of advice for job interviews for all internationally trained lawyers is to practice your answers out loud. All of us lawyers can think of answers really clearly, can think about what we would say, but it's very different saying it out loud, being as eloquent in English as you might be in your home language. These are things that until you practice it, it doesn't get easier. And so always try to practice out loud, practice with your friends, record yourself if you need to. But that is my biggest piece of advice for job interviews. And so that's it for my presentation. I'm happy to go through questions now, but similar to Megan's slide, here's all of our recruitment contact information. So please feel free to reach out if you have any questions.
Thank you so much, Michael, for that excellent presentation. And I really liked how you started with packaging yourself and went into a broad range of information about careers and a lot of elements that go into actually finding a position. So we have a number of questions. Let's see how many we can get through.
Sure.
So the first one is about finding mentors. How do I find mentors who will help me package myself?
So there are informal and formal ways to find legal mentors. There are lots of different associations out there with formal mentorship opportunities, especially for internationally trained lawyers, especially for lawyers who are at the junior level. Different diversity associations like, Women in Law or the South Asian Bar Association or the Federation of Asian Canadian Lawyers have these structured mentoring opportunities. But there's also lots of ad hoc informal mentorships that can take place just through your your own natural networking. Again, I think the biggest thing to remember from the beginning of my presentation is everyone wants to help. They just need to know how they can help you. And so if you're looking for that kind of mentorship, find people who are similar to you, similar to your maybe background or similar in your work experience, so that you can kind of start those conversations with them and then approach them for a more formal mentorship relationship.
Thank you. Excellent advice. So the next question is, do you know if the Law Society of Ontario provides extensions to the licensing period?
So the Law Society allows you 3 years in order to complete licensing. However, I do know that they will work with candidates on a one-on-one basis, and I think this applies to any regulator or law society, where they will sort of have people who are there on the membership board to talk to candidates to see, is the situation working out for you? Can something be done for you? So if you are in a situation where you need an extension, always reach out, whether it's the regulatory bodies, whether it's the licensing bodies, to see if something can be done for you, because there's no one size fits all answer for any sort of extraordinary exceptions or extensions. You're the one who sort of has to reach out to see if that can be made.
Okay, so you had your resume on screen and somebody's asking, what happens if there are gaps in the resume? So I think you had like the years, let's say 2020, 2019, etc. So what if you haven't worked for a couple of years? Do you still use that format?
So I would still use that format. I think reverse chronological is something that is really useful for employers when they're looking at job applications. But I would just be upfront about any gaps in your education. I think, remember, many times lawyers are looking at your application, and as lawyers, we are trained to identify gaps and missing information. And so none of that is going to escape the view of somebody who's looking at your application. But more important, maybe, is in your cover letter to give some context to that, right? Was that a time where you were taking care of your family, or there was a transition happening? Or, did you take time off to sort of for your own mental health and wellness, and you've dealt with that now, and you've been resilient because of it, and you now know exactly what you're capable of doing, right? So always, again, make it part of your narrative. Don't apologize for it. Own up to exactly why there is a gap in your experience. Be honest about it. But again, make it a way that the reader of that understands and can understand you in context, and makes it seem like you know yourself very well and why you'd be a good candidate for them.
Thank you so much for that. I wouldn't have thought of that, to put that in the cover letter, actually. So can you shed some light on volunteering related to the legal field? Will it help get a job faster or
I
easier?
I think I mean, again, to everybody's sort of questions about getting experience, getting Canadian experience, I think it can certainly help, but volunteering isn't always a structured kind of process. Not every firm has a process for volunteering. And so I think, back to my point about advocating for yourself, if you find a lawyer who's doing what you're interested in doing and you know how busy they are, then tell them what you're capable of doing and offer your services to volunteer for them. I know there are other structured volunteering opportunities within law for different associations and organizations to deal with conferences, to deal with memberships. And so that might be a good way to sort of expand your network. And then finally, there's lots of different legal clinics and pro bono offices. I know I know Pro Bono Canada and Law Help Ontario regularly seek NCA candidates as part of their volunteering triage coordinators for people who are helping self-represented litigants. And so there's lots of opportunities out there, but again, there's nothing structured or formal about some of the firms. And so you'll have to know what you can do in terms of offering your volunteering services.
Great. This is a very specific question. I have a master's degree in my country in civil law and only 8 months experience as a legal assistant in my homeland. What is the best way to start here in Canada?
Well, I mean, I don't think there's any one answer for that, but I think it's all of the tips sort of that I was talking about. It's even in how that question is posed, own up to the amazing quality of experience you might have had as a legal assistant, why that might be of benefit to a Canadian employer here, how that's a selling point for you, right? Even in how that question is asked, you want to recognize, is there a self-confidence concern here? And is there an opportunity for me to be more confident about what I have done and what I can do for other people? So advocate for yourself, I think, is always the best first step. But then also just do some soul searching and figure out, what are skills I have developed? What are things I can do? And to your point about being so sort of fresh out of school, that might be an appealing factor to some employers. They might want somebody who is a little bit more moldable, who hasn't already decided how they want to do certain things in legal files, and train you in the way that they're going to have you do things, because every employer is going to want to do that.
Is age going to be an impediment? Let's say I'm 35 and I move to Canada. I know a lot of people who move here in their 30s. So tell me about, what is your experience? Will I still have a good chance?
Yeah, I think that's an excellent question. And I think that comes down to how well you can advocate for yourself. Again, I mean, that is my biggest point and my biggest confidence. It is a little disingenuous to say, hi, like I'm coming from a new country. I've had an excellent career back home and I want to be a student again, right? And so make sure that the employer knows why you want to be a student again, why this is part of your overall career plan or career path. And usually the honest answer is the right answer there, whether that's opportunities for your family or you had to move because of a specific circumstance. Being a little bit more upfront about that and understanding how that was part of your process is going to be much more compelling than not addressing that at all, having all this amazing experience back home, and then now trying to convince me that all of a sudden you want to be a student in my firm. So I don't think age is necessarily a hindrance, especially if you give context for why you're moving, why you're doing this career change. But I think be mindful that you're the one who has to convince me why you are a good candidate, and what I'm looking for might be somebody who is moldable in the way I want to train you. So then convince me that the experience you have makes you even more moldable than somebody who might be younger than you.
That is great. I'm so, happy that you're talking about positioning and branding, because that's important in any field or any career. There are a number of other questions, but unfortunately, we're running out of time. We've gone over time. So I would encourage you to write to the email address right there that Michael has shared. So I think there will be responses, right, Michael? There will be
Yeah,
someone responding.
Yeah, our recruitment team is well versed in sort of not only our programs, but sort of helping internationally trained lawyers. And if any questions need to be escalated up to the bigger team, they always do that. They'll shoot me or Megan a message to say, like, how would we respond to this? I did a few of those this morning. So our standard turnaround is about 2 to 3 business days for any inquiries to recruitment.
That's great. Thank you so much. So thank you to Michael, and thank you to everyone who's here attending our web conference, offered in partnership with Access Employment and sponsored by Osgood Professional Development. So once again, special thanks to Megan and Michael for your expertise and sharing your skills with everyone. And Michael, thank you for sharing your personal story as well. So if you've missed anything, this web conference is being posted online, available on YouTube and also on CanadianImmigrant.ca. And you can message us at info@CanadianImmigrant.ca if you have any specific topics that you'd like us to run articles on. We can go back to Michael and ask him for his expertise, or Megan and ask them to write some articles. So thank you to all our attendees, and we'll be back with our next webinar for internationally trained professionals. Have a good day.